It's going to be so cool. I think people will have NFTs that get published, and scientists should earn royalties for that as people trade hands on these like things that have such important impacts in society.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the scientific paper is not the ideal medium to communicate science through.
Yeah, that's what we're doing with NewLimit. It's early days, and we're basically recruiting the founding team and more people for that team. And we've got some office space set up in Redwood City, California.
So hello and welcome to the Cheeky Science Show, where in this video I had the great pleasure of speaking with two guests, Brian Armstrong, CEO of Coinbase, who along with Patrick Joyce, a medical student, launched the platform ResearchHub. Here we chat all about ResearchHub and how blockchain technology can aid sharing of scientific research. And we also discuss Brian's recent longevity company announcement, NewLimit, and how they both view the future of research. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So hi Brian, hi Patrick, thank you both for joining me today and welcome to the Cheeky Science Show. It's great to have you both on here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, really excited to be here.
Great, thank you. So on my YouTube channel, I also talk a lot about research papers and try to break them down to my audience and explain exactly the latest research. And so one thing that I often find, one of the reasons why I do this is because I feel like there's often a need to try and communicate science to the community. And a good way to do that is to kind of digest a paper in a kind of shortened format, because it can take hours to actually read a paper properly. And so together you have launched ResearchHub, which effectively is a platform where academics can upload research papers, summarize them, discuss them with other academics, and also even propose different theories around their field of interest. And in reward for this, they get given a research coin. And so I guess my first question is, where did this idea for ResearchHub come from, and how did you guys meet? How did the whole thing kind of arise?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can jump in and start, and Joyce, I'll turn it over to you too. So by the way, Eleanor, we're both big fans of your papers and your videos that you help explain those papers. I think it's just making science so much more accessible, which we're both passionate about. But yeah, I mean, Joyce and I really met a year or two ago, and we had both sort of independently been thinking about this similar idea, which is that we both felt like scientific research was kind of broken. It was sort of inefficient. And, Joyce would tell his story too. I came from a more of like an open source software point of view, thinking about how could scientific research be more like open source software. So in scientific research today, people kind of often operate in silos. They're sort of guarding their secrets closely, from the other labs. There's a real scarcity mindset around funding. And then the whole process of getting peer reviewed and put in these journals is just very slow and cumbersome. And, it never really made sense to me. Why are there these big paywalls? Why are there big delays? Even during COVID, we saw some of these rules got thrown out the window, and people would publish to the preprint servers. You'd see peer reviews appearing on Twitter or Medium, within 24 hours. And like the whole pace of science just accelerated during COVID out of necessity. And it kind of begs the question, why can't it happen that way all the time? Faster is not always better. You want to make sure you're going for high quality and reproducibility, but I don't think there's any reason why it needs to be done the same way it's been done, for the last hundreds of years. And one other thing that really jumped out to me was that why do we still use the PDF as the format of a how do we publish research? It's like, in open source software is never done. It's like you put out a draft today, you get comments on it, you're always shipping, version 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. Software is never done. It's always evolving. And so, I think Joyce and I share this vision of creating the future of the scientific paper. I mean, today we're going to start with PDFs because that's how a lot of the science is done. We just want people to be able to discuss it and prioritize it and get interesting access to interesting papers that maybe they wouldn't have seen otherwise. But the future of that is probably these electronic lab notebooks that allows people to publish not only the text, but also the data and the code behind it. So it's more reproducible. And then it's a ever living document that can have input from the community and updates pushed from people who maybe you've never even met. And it's more collaborative and open. There's lots of other things we could figure out, like, how to fix funding and all kinds of stuff. But I don't know, Joyce, you have a really interesting background. Maybe you should talk about how you came to the same conclusion independently.
Yeah, totally. So I'm a huge science nerd. During undergrad, I was really lucky and I got to do research in a Hopkins tumor biology lab looking at the epigenetic signatures of different cancer cell lines. I fell in love with bench research. I started a PhD program in molecular biology and biochemistry. Was also very lucky in that I got to work in a couple of very cool labs. One specifically was in synthetic biology for a PI who had had multiple Nature papers. And I just remember he was like an early career researcher, maybe like early 30s, was coming up for a grant review. And there was maybe 6 months where he was just walking on eggshells continuously because despite the fact he was essentially at the top of his field with multiple Nature papers, there was no guarantee that he was going to receive the funding he needed in order to like continue his lab, employ like the grad students that were working for him, keep his kids in school. I remember him like specifically saying like, if I don't get this, I'm gonna have to move out of Boston and like put my kids in a new school. And I was like, oh man, it feels crazy for someone who had so much success in the past. I have a bunch of stories that were ridiculous from my PhD program. Another one which stands out was another member of our lab was on their 9th year. Normally a PhD in molecular biology is like 5 to 7 years. So they were in their 9th year, essentially had completely run out of funding. They were sleeping on a friend's couch and paying for their own reagents and experiments out of their own pocket just to maybe get the results they needed in order to graduate with a PhD so they could go make like 50 plus K as a postdoc somewhere. And so to me, it was clear that like an individual's like effort and essentially desire to succeed, a lot of you have to have the cards have to fall right in science in order for you to have like a successful career. I think in the US it's like 1% of first year PhD students end up being like research professors. So I ended up kind of seeing this landscape where the funding of science caused this like kind of like low quality of life for people who are working so hard to create new knowledge. And so I ended up leaving with the master's, started medical school, very passionate about mental health and psychiatry. The medical school I went to was great in that they get you into the clinic like in the first week of medical school. And so I saw like firsthand a lot of medications that had really unintended consequences. Just like a quick anecdote, I remember one patient when I was shadowing a family medicine physician who, when she was younger, had asthma. And so took corticosteroids for asthma and kind of stayed on this like corticosteroid treatment for her entire life, and eventually like over the course of like a decade or two ended up like eroding her GI tract, so she was unable to actually like eat normally, had to have like a stomach tube and have food through that because of this like seemingly innocuous medication that was used for asthma throughout her whole life. And so, like in psychiatry, there are also lots of examples of drugs that should be much better than they are. And I thought to myself, I think that the infrastructure for how basic research and like academic research is funded and published kind of is this like bottleneck in like new product creation on the clinical side of things. And so I ended up taking a year off medical school and working on a project where the idea was to try and create new incentives for basically publishing research openly, reproducibly, and then directing funding to the people who are doing the best work. And so Brian and I had similar ideas, ended up meeting, kind of collaborating, and we've been working on ResearchHub for about 2 years.
Awesome. No, and also I completely agree. Also from my side as well, I see that there's many kind of like barriers in place in the way like academia is structured. And this is why like I was really interested when I heard about ResearchHub. And so how exactly does your platform work, and how does it actually try and solve these problems?
Joyce, you want to start off?
Yeah, sure. So right now in academia, the way that you kind of like prove that you're worthy for grant funding and then eventually tenure, like career stability, is by publishing. So if you're, my PI in Boston who had multiple Nature papers, in theory, you're demonstrating your value to someone who wants to fund research. And so you can basically earn funding, and then over time, an institution will give you tenure, and you have career stability. This is like a bibliometric reward structure. It's like a library-based metrics, publication metrics. And so this worked for a really long time, basically since like the beginning of funding science in the 1600s, when the first journal like existed, and there were like, rich patrons who would give like Louis Pasteur money in order to like, mess around with like glass pipes or whatever. And we've stayed with that system. The only issue is that people have gotten very good at gaming it. So when you're in academia, your goal is to publish as much as you can, not necessarily like do the best science. Those are sort of different things. They talk about perverse incentives in academia. Like there's like salami slicing, there's a reproducibility crisis. Like it's better to have a big headline than it is to have like a very rock solid paper. Even like studies have shown that like if you publish negative results, it can actually hurt your career. So what people will do is like, if their thesis isn't proven by their experimental results, they'll just take the results and put them in the desk drawer. So that way nobody ever sees them again. This is a huge issue because it's like, there's all the science that's happening, and this old school incentive structure that kind of just was grandfathered in ends up producing all of these unintended behaviors among like the scientific community, where if you had a plastic reward structure, for instance, using ResearchCoin, maybe, you could actually like study how incentives cause different behaviors among academics and try and create rewards that incentivize the best behaviors. So rather than just saying, hey, like we're going to give money to whoever publishes the most, we could say, hey, we're going to give money to whoever produces the most reproducible science, or, whoever is like thinking about the most like novel ideas, or it could be literally anything using tokenomic structure. So the idea with ResearchHub is to try and create an infrastructure where you can reward behaviors that actually make science as a whole better. And as Brian said, we're starting with PDFs first, where people can essentially earn tokens for openly discussing scientific literature. But I think there's a lot of different directions that this could go in the future, especially with the input of like our awesome community of people like you, Eleanor, who like exist in this world, and actually have personal experiences with it and have great ideas, probably better than Brian and I do ourselves, on how to make things better.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a lot of good pieces coming together here. I mean, so that V1 is really, all right, let's just take the paper, like make a modern web app for preprint servers. Archive and bioRxiv are a huge step in the right direction because it just made it science papers more accessible. But those applications, they're kind of old now. They look like they're from 10 years ago or something. So first step was just, let's make a modern web application where people can discuss and rank these papers and earn this reward token for adding it. Just like if you were reading interesting papers already every week, might as well put them there. It's kind of like a journal club, but it's the new journal is what we call hubs. People are aggregating these papers and uploading them and whatnot. And then the V2 is like, okay, we've shipped our V1 of an electronic lab notebook feature. It integrates, Jupyter notebooks, and we think that people, hopefully, I think they may be kind of more people earlier in their academic career or things like that, but they'll start to publish papers not via traditional mechanism on a PDF, but maybe start with drafting it and doing collaborative science in putting it in an electronic lab notebook. By the way, they can also then go submit it to a journal afterwards, but publishing in that format, no longer the PDF, the electronic version with the data and the code would be the V2. And then I think in the future, we may even allow people to actually go in there and license IP or breakthroughs to go commercialize those kind of scientific breakthroughs, because there's a whole other issue we haven't got to in this life cycle, which is usually in universities when they have the tech transfer office, and how do scientific breakthroughs get commercialized into products so that millions of people in the world can actually benefit from it. There's this huge gap between these two worlds. So that's kind of our progression, is like, yeah, better ranking and discussion of papers, electronic papers. Now we can make it easier for them to be the tech transfer office into commercialization. And all of this is kind of incentivized with this reward token we've created, ResearchCoin, to help the community that's coming in to build all this content and create it to be rewarded for that. So that's the rough approach that we're taking.
Cool. No, you've explained that really well. So in terms of ResearchHub itself, obviously I've been on the platform, I've had a bit of a play around myself and upload some papers. And so For people who also want to kind of join in, do they have to have, you mentioned tokenomics and ResearchCoin, do you have to have any kind of crypto understanding to be able to join the platform, or is it literally anyone, if they want to join, can join?
Yeah, so we made it really simple for people to join and contribute, even if they have no knowledge of crypto. I mean, frankly, I think a lot of scientists probably have a lot of skepticism about crypto, so it's not even something we really focus on the website. It's sort of like, if you didn't look closely, you might just think that people are uploading just like you've seen on Reddit or Hacker News or Twitter. You know, every social platform out there has some kind of a like button or upvote button. So in a way, it's something that's very familiar to everybody. You don't need to go create a crypto wallet or anything. You're just kind of accumulating research coin, just like you would on Reddit, accumulating karma points. But the difference here is that if you want to, you can actually withdraw research coin, and in the future you might be able to use it on an exchange or something like that. You might be able to. You can also, by the way, transfer research coin. Like if you want to support other scientific, content on ResearchHub, you can use it to support. Like in the future, we may even have the ability for people to fund research on the site using research coin. Yeah, so we've thought about that a little bit. I mean, Joyce, maybe do you want to talk about the tokenomics and how we've allocated the different portions of research coin to the community and foundation and whatnot?
Yeah, definitely. So we have 60% of the total token supply. Initially, we minted 1 billion tokens, where 60% are earmarked to be distributed to the community. So in theory, we plan on giving out about 5% a year through actual activity on the platform, like people who post papers, discuss papers, essentially generate content. And then also we have a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization, where the community is able to essentially help govern the platform using the token. And so we also have people who perform services for the DAO can also earn these tokens. For instance, we have a couple of really passionate community members who actually helped us get an interview with the founder of Sci-Hub. So they're like able to speak Russian, and we're able to translate for her during an interview. And so we helped kind of incentivize this like community building behaviors by using research coin. So it's a really cool thing where everyone who has the token is all of a sudden on the same team and has incentives aligned and feel empowered to be able to influence the direction of our product and community. So yeah, the idea is that when you reward people directly for certain behaviors using a coin, you can actually influence the exact behaviors that they're doing, rather than the sort of like secondary process of, oh, let me publish, and then eventually my CV will be worth enough to convince the Gates Foundation or the NIH to be able to fund me. So it's like a direct reward for doing good behaviors that can change over time as we learn more about how our user interactions actually are influenced by the coin.
Cool. So in terms of the platform as well, is there any kind of major challenges that you think you face at the moment? So one of them, of some of most like social media platforms, you need people using the platform to kind of get the interactions going. So besides, like, I guess, bringing in a larger community to the platform, what kind of challenges do you think you're going to face to reach your goals?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of challenges in any kind of new startup. You have to make something that people want to use, right? And we've developed this initial V1 product. I think it's a good start, but it's a long ways from where our ultimate vision wants to be. So the initial early community that's there already on ResearchHub, and we host a community call every week, which people can join our Slack if they want to participate more. But it's this really passionate kind of core initial group, and so we're like really hugging them close and getting their feedback. And the whole team that's building the app today is probably only about 5 people. It's a handful of engineers, a designer, a PM, and really Joyce, and whatever spare time I have, I try to help out here and there. But it's an early app, but the people who are passionate about it today, which is this initial small group, they can see the potential in it, but they know that it's not quite there yet today. So yeah, I mean, basically we're going out and getting the initial seeds of community members. And what we've asked some people to do actually is to become editors on some of these hubs. It's kind of like editors of a journal. And people earn research coin for doing that. But it's really, we're just asking editors like, hey, if you're seeing interesting papers in this hub every every week or two. Just submit them to the site, maybe help curate if you see bad content that's not scientific. You could help moderate it a little bit. And that's been our sort of initial path to get some of these initial hubs booted up. But I think it's going to be quirky and weird for a while. I always make this analogy, like when YouTube first started, it was people putting videos of cats and just very quirky stuff. And but now YouTube is like bigger than having a television show. If you have a million subscribers on YouTube, it's like way better than having a TV show on CNBC. But that took 10, 20 years for that to flip. And so similarly, we're seeing some kind of initial early adopters of ResearchHub they're not like the most mainstream things out there. Like if you're a tenured professor, you probably still want to put your stuff in Nature. But our goal over time is to flip that on its head and just say, you know what, if you need to grow your career, like you can do it on this platform where you can interact live with your people who are benefiting from the kind of research you're doing. You can interact live with your collaborators. You can even get kind of rewards for doing that. Hopefully introductions to better funding, all kinds of things. So anyway, just like every startup, we're building something new, and it's a lot of little things to get right along the way.
To kind of add on to that too, a lot of our early community is early career researchers. As I mentioned earlier, in the US, it's like 1% of first-year PhD students end up becoming professors. So it's like pretty difficult to become a PI. Like you have to overcome a lot of odds, and it's like within this extremely competitive job market. So when I've been seeking feedback from people, a lot of really well-established professors, I think that they're hesitant to sort of buy into this whole new structure for trying to like judge the merit of a research paper, right? Because like they've had success in the current system and it's super hard to do so. So yeah, I think over time, as we have more community members and like more like high quality content on the site, I think we'll be able to win them over. But a lot of the other side of that are like postdocs, like grad students who want to be doing academic research, but they don't necessarily see an avenue for themselves to be doing it just because of the extremely competitive job market. So they see us as a potential like exit from academia, where they'd be able to, in theory, like earn a living earning these coins by doing what they want to do, which is academic research on their own, not an industry kind of like self-directed through a website.
Yeah, just one more thing you made me think of too. So as Joyce mentioned, we're planning to give away about 5% of the supply of research coin per year for the first 10, or I think it was 12 years until we get to that 60% allocation. Then we'll probably issue more over time. But you can imagine, if you're one of 1,000 people on the site, but we're distributing 5% every year, that you get a much bigger share than if we were, if there's 1 million people on the site, 5 years from now or something, and we're still distributing 5% every year. And so there's definitely, this is one of the theories that we're testing here, which a lot of people in the world are testing right now with DAOs and, issuing reward tokens and whatnot, which is, can this mechanism help solve a little bit of the cold start problem that startups have of building that community? Because historically, Airbnb and Uber and like these communities, you had to have these, it was so hard to get them going in the early stages, but once they got going, it had this huge flywheel effect. And so we'll see. I think crypto could be an interesting way to help a little bit of that cold start problem, but there's no substitute for you have to build something that's useful for people in the world. And so we're keeping our eye firmly on that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And well, so far ResearchHub, at least the idea to me, seems very useful in terms of being able to summarize data so you get quicker access or a better understanding of a research study in a shorter period of time, as well as having the ability to discuss and comment on other work, and even to have easy access to different disciplines you wouldn't often read. And so obviously, yeah, ResearchHub is solving a lot of problems in academia. But do you think there are any problems still in academia that you don't think ResearchHub will be able to address? Or other thoughts on that?
So one good example, I think, is like access to academia. For instance, like a lot of the like major institutions are in specific spots in the world. And if you're not born in a certain place, it's really hard for you to gain access to those locations. So like ResearchHub is an online space, right? Like there's no laboratory space, like there's not a lot of like, I guess, education. So essentially like you can contribute content and earn tokens for it, but like the educational piece of it isn't totally there at the moment. So yeah, I think access to academia is something that we don't necessarily address in kind of our first iteration.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. The only other one I think of for me is like, if we want to try to improve reproducibility, for instance, I think, you might have a study that's fairly low cost to reproduce, and you can put a bounty almost up there and like go get a check mark on your paper. Okay, this person reproduced it or something. But if you have a very expensive long-term study, or like you need a large hadron collider or something to do your physics study, it's like, I don't know how ResearchHub is not probably going to be able to help with some of those like massive basic science, really expensive questions. But a lot of research, you can move the needle for like $10,000, $20,000 right now. So it's not, I think there's a huge segment we can help today. And maybe over time, if it gets bigger with more and more funding and resources, we could tackle bigger things too.
Yeah, they're really good points. And so obviously at the moment, it's about uploading PDFs and obviously taking material from actual journals. And so I guess one thing that often ideas I've thrown around with like other PhD students I talk to is where they see like the future of journals in 10 or plus years, and whether that is the most effective way of communicating the current research. As we've already discussed, there's issues with like how long it takes to write a paper, delays, and getting it out and getting it accessible to everyone. And so, one way I feel like I try to bridge the gap is by making videos. So I feel like I'm quite a visual learner. I think it's important still to show like the actual graphs and data, and try to basically highlight the key points. So you don't have to like not waste time, but spend so much time actually trying to read through a paper. And so what, like, do you think there's still a future for PDF journals? And I think you've already somewhat touched on it, but like, how would you see the future of scientific research?
Yeah, well, Joyce, you should jump in too. I mean, one thing you just made me think of is we are very passionate about this idea of making science more accessible as well. And I think your videos are such a great example of that. Like, I'm kind of a visual learner too. And I find it quite hard to digest like a whole paper, much less 10 papers in a day or something. Sometimes people tell me like, oh, I went and skimmed like 10 papers to get a sense of what's going on. I'm like, how do you even do that? I have no idea how people do that. And then I think that a lot of papers, they suffer from this idea. It's a little bit of like an ivory tower type thing or something, where they're almost trying to use the fanciest language possible to like, because the real audience in their mind for this paper is maybe the 10 other people in the world who are really in that field, who it's like they're writing it for their peers, not for the broader community. So, I think a lot about Wikipedia, right? Like Wikipedia, usually the introductory paragraphs of any Wikipedia article, if you have a basic, even high school education, you can kind of understand what's happening in that article. But that doesn't prevent the article from getting into really technical topics later down, and you can kind of go as deep as you want, right? And so, we thought about this. Actually, it'd be cool for any paper on ResearchHub, the author or maybe anybody who submitted it, they could almost like put up a bounty and just say, I want to have like an explainer video for this paper because I just want to help more people understand it, or maybe we can write a summary of it in plain English. And so we thought about that. It'd be cool to like kind of have a service where anybody could get an explainer video created or something like that. But I don't know, Joyce, what do you think about the future of journals and research?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the scientific paper is not the ideal medium to communicate science through. It's just like, as I mentioned earlier, this like grandfathered in kind of like tradition, because it's always been that way. Even like the idea of like, oh, here's an introduction, here's a method section, here's my results discussion. Like it's just kind of like a traditional type of format. One thing I'm really excited about are micro publications. So one of the big issues with a scientific paper is it takes like a really long time to produce. Like from the time you do your first experiment to when you collect all your data, to when you analyze it, to when you actually like write the manuscript, to then submitting it for peer review, getting like feedback back, making changes, then submitting it again. And then when it's actually published, I think it's like in chemistry and biology, normally there's almost a year delay from when you actually like, forget about even doing the research, like submit the paper for peer review and then it's eventually published. Even during COVID, like preprints were great because you could get information out immediately, but there would be peer-reviewed publications that would just be completely out of date because they're like from 4 months ago. And so it kind of like this like totally unnecessary temporal delay that exists because of the structure of a scientific paper, I think, slows down academia as a whole. And so one of the things that can happen in the future, kind of like similar to how Twitter has like a, character limit on information, is micropublications, where if I do one experiment, I can, put it into a post, publish it, earn tokens off it, do my next experiment, publish that, publish everything throughout the course of the entire research project, and then synthesize it at the end, publish it, collect feedback, and have live version control. So everything's happening in the open. Anyone can see what I'm publishing at any given moment. I can like earn funding in theory from every piece of it. And then the end result of this would be like real-time science, rather than having something that's like communicating results that I actually like collected like 2 or 3 years ago. So to me, the really exciting thing is maybe moving past a scientific paper to a more like stream of consciousness type of science, where anyone can learn and use the information that's being produced in real time.
That's such a really interesting idea. And I was going to quickly comment and say that to some extent does sound maybe at times it could be a bit overwhelming or like too much information overload. But then at the same time, I think even in the current system, I'm already overloaded with papers that I don't read. So yeah, I think that that's just a big problem on its own, is how we like digest all the content that's produced on a daily basis. But that's a really interesting idea. And so like besides like the publishing aspects, do you like what kind of duration do you think we might start to see some of these changes?
Yeah, well, I think so. We've got our V1 out. We have even a V1 of our electronic lab notebook out, right? So we'd love people to go out and test that and give us feedback on it. It's still in the very earliest stages. I think that my hope is, I don't know, Joyce, tell me if you agree. I think in the next year or so, we could probably get a really pretty well-functioning electronic lab notebook out there that's fully compatible with Jupyter notebooks and all that stuff. And then, but this is going to be a 10-year journey. Like I'm a big believer in like the 10-year overnight success. So we're just like going to keep our heads down, keep relentlessly making improvements. And my hope is like we get that early community to just keep it growing and growing. So. I don't know, Joyce, anything you want to add?
Yeah, one thing I'm really excited about is we're working with a quantum biology lab out of UCLA, and this is a really interesting group. They're super talented scientists, but just due to the nature of their work, quantum biology, which is a very like cutting edge new field, they have a hard time getting funding. In the US, the NIH, they'll fund like quantum physics, and then they'll fund like biochemistry and molecular biology. But this is sort of like an intersection of two fields where they just kind of like get like passed over by the big funding agencies. So these are like incredibly talented scientists who, just due to this like completely inefficient funding system, they're willing to produce content like aimed towards the general audience in order to attract funding from people who might be interested. So to me, this is like a really cool like incentive situation where these super talented scientists like are essentially going to share micro publications that are targeted at lay people. And it's a very technical field, but they're publishing with the thought process of, I need to get the average person engaged so that way I can raise awareness of this field. So that way, eventually the NIH will be like, oh yeah, this is totally worthwhile. This lab has like 100,000 Twitter followers and everybody's really excited about their work. So yeah, I think the ability to help like channel resources to people who are doing very exciting work, I think is something that we'll be able to do in the next year. And I'm very excited about it.
Cool. So you kind of touched on an interesting point, which is obviously we've been talking so far at the kind of like the publication and release of the data that's collected, but thinking backwards to like the structure of like a research group itself with like postdocs, PhD students, and like a PI, a group leader, how do you think that this like new future way of publishing research might actually affect the structure of like research labs?
Oh, this is like my favorite question. The one thing that I think is crazy, and I actually have a friend who left academia who's a super talented PhD student, like optical physics. But one thing that just blows my mind is a PI, right? Like the way you get to be a PI is you like do good research and you write good papers. And then eventually like someone says, oh, hey, you're worthwhile to be a professor. And then you go from a researcher to a manager and grant writer. And so like there's not a lot of training for these things. It's like you're trained to be a researcher and then all of a sudden like you shift into this totally different role that just like the academic like infrastructure forces you to. And it's kind of like a waste of talent to a certain degree. So I think one thing that ResearchHub will be able to help with a lot is take away some of the like boring work of like writing grants. One thing we find very inspiring is fast grants. Have you heard of this program? It was basically to help like streamline COVID funding. A couple cool people got together and they were like, hey, here's just like a Google form. Like we're gonna have people apply for funding. You just need to send like 5 paragraphs about what you're working on and then like update us once a month with 1 paragraph. And so rather than like taking months to write a grant where like you get rejected most of the time, it's like a super simple, streamlined, I can spend an afternoon, describe my project and like maybe get funding. And so if we could help PIs essentially get back to actually doing research rather than having to be like managers and grant writers, I think that that would kind of change the structure of a lab in a really good way where you can have the most talented scientists doing the actual science, which I think will have really cool downstream effects.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost like right now every lab has to have all these talents in one place, like the fundraiser and the communicator and the experimentalist and the fact checker or whatever. And it's almost like previously every company had to run their own data center and manage their own servers, and like now we have AWS, and so you can kind of offload the undifferentiated burden, one might say, to other places. And so I think in the future you'll see research happen differently, where maybe the fundraising piece is done through a website or something like ResearchHub, or maybe even you'll have teams of researchers that they're not physically in the same location, right? It depends on what kind of research you're doing. Sometimes you need to still be in that laboratory or whatever, but there's collaborations that could occur in various fields that somebody comes in and provides a piece of the solution that you've actually never even met them. They're like somebody on this site. I've personally had that experience in the software world, and it's kind of a magical thing. You're stuck on some problem, and some kid on the other side of the world like submits a pull request in, and it's like, whoa, that's kind of a cool idea, and you don't even know who this person is, right? And so I think you could see a little bit more decentralization, if you will, of that, how science is done. You're seeing bits and pieces of this already. Like there's people crowdfunding some studies online and finding participants for the study online. And so anyway, you can see more and more of these pieces coming together. And the lower friction we can make it for this to happen, I think the faster we'll make progress in society. You made me think of one other thing too, which was when we were talking earlier, which is that I think the incentive structure around science today, there's sort of this false currency, if you will, about citations. And so people are very driven to get more citations in their career to advance because it's there's not like a true economy. If you do have a scientific breakthrough, and it's hard, it's very, very few scientific breakthroughs actually ever get commercialized, and the revenue upside of those products doesn't get shared with the scientists who actually create it, except in rare cases. Like you can imagine, Genentech, I think, came out of the tech transfer office at Stanford, and I think Stanford made a bunch of money from that. I don't know if the original scientists did, but most scientific papers are really just like they're taking an existing idea and putting a tiny iterative thing on it to get citations. It's not actually, they're not aligned. The incentives are not aligned in science to go solve problems for real world people. And that's okay. Sometimes you want to have some basic science that's just like, who knows how this will ever be used. But I also think it's good to align incentives. And so hopefully we're streamlining that process a little bit, where not only with ResearchCoin, but eventually you'll be able to just license this stuff right on the site. Almost like in the open source world, we have the MIT license or the Apache license. You don't have to do a bespoke custom agreement for every piece of open source software. You can just, oh, that's the license. Do I want to use it? Boom, and you're off, and you can go commercialize some products. So again, in the specialization category, it's almost like we're having entrepreneurs do their role, and scientists can do their role, and they can bridge the gap a little bit with some of these tools.
to kind of add on to that idea too, with the currency of citations, like one of the worst parts about this is the most valuable citations exist in journals where the content is published behind paywalls, and the authors themselves don't get to keep rights. Like they sign away the rights to their paper to this publisher. And so one of the things that like we can do long term with ResearchCoin is try and disintermediate this system where we can help authors keep ownership of their own content and share it, as Brian said, under like these open source licenses that anyone is able to use. There are these crazy stories where like authors will publish in a journal and then like share their own paper somewhere and then end up like seeing like legal repercussions for it just because of the current structure. And like, I personally don't think that that's okay. So I think that we can use financial incentives in order to help empower researchers to kind of like own their own content and share it, how they feel like they want to share it rather than how like some other company thinks is best for their bottom line.
Cool. Yeah. That makes me really excited to hear as a researcher. And you also raised the really important point about citations, and that kind of somewhat also goes back to funding, as the more citations you have for works, often more likely to lead to more funding. And it kind of raised an interesting idea that this year in particular, I mean, maybe it's been going on longer than I've noticed, but different, I guess, like blockchain-based technologies are being employed to help fundraise for different research as well. So, I mean, earlier this year, I heard of VisaDAO, which is trying to fundraise for longevity projects. And it's also something I've recently come across, I don't fully understand, called Gitcoin, which I think is also for fundraising. So I was just wondering if you could both comment on how you see this overlap between blockchain technology and funding academic research.
Joyce, you want to start? I mean, we both could chat about this for a while, but.
Yeah. So one of the really cool things I think about the blockchain industry right now is it's like very experimental. People are trying out like all kinds of different ideas. Like this is a huge cliche, but it's like a Cambrian explosion of different ways to like potentially fund science. So like, as you mentioned, like Gitcoin, that model can be used to potentially fund research projects. I think VitaDAO does something where like if you hold the token, you own some kind of like IP rights to the like research project that eventually works. So that's nice because it actually like gives funders something back for like spending their research or research funding. With ResearchCoin, one of the best parts is that we have this like sort of easy to change incentive structure. So over time, we're going to have like an evidence-based reward scheme where in theory, like we can like learn from these different models and employ the ones that are most effective. Even like I've seen like projects are publishing NFTs right now of like the figure, like the most popular figure from their paper in order to like, potentially like earn a couple K of funding for their next project. So I think there's a lot of really cool things happening right now in a sort of like thought experiment kind of fashion. And a couple of them are going to catch on and I think like make it a lot easier for the average person to become a scientist.
Yeah, but we're definitely seeing a lot of exciting fundraising opportunities come together with DAOs and in crypto. And the NFT one Joyce mentioned, I think is really interesting. I remember reading a long time ago that Bill Gates actually went and bought a copy of the Da Vinci notebook. I think it was the Codex or something like that. And, why did somebody want to have an original copy of that in their collection? And well, it's kind of an inspiring document, a little piece of science, early science, and so I do think that research papers there, if you wanted to mint an original of it, people who just really love that particular breakthrough in science, I mean, imagine like the double helix or like whatever kind of inspiring one you can think of. It's going to be so cool. I think people will have NFTs that get published, and scientists should earn royalties for that as people trade hands on these like things that have such important impacts in society.
Cool. That's really interesting. NFTs as well is something that I've only more recently come across. And so I guess it's really interesting just to kind of explore the possibilities and to kind of, I guess, see what happens. So speaking more generally about just funding research, this kind of leads more to you, Brian, but last week or the week before, you recently announced that you're helping to fund a new company called NewLimit, which are going to be entering the epigenetic reprogramming space, I believe. So I was just wondering if you could explain the story behind that.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, as you can see, there's I have a passion for advancing science, and one of the things I've been learning about a lot in the last few years is longevity as well. You know, I'm really fortunate to have had the last 10 years building Coinbase, and it's been such a great company, and I think it's just getting started. And I think, you know, as the CEO of Coinbase, I felt like I've developed this ability to fund some new initiatives in the world and basically do capital allocation into interesting areas, even frankly harder, more difficult areas. You know, I think if you make money in software, which is having this big golden age right now, you know, I feel like you almost have an obligation to go try harder things in the world and help some of those companies get off the ground. So as an investor and a board member, I've been excited about doing something in the longevity space. I started hosting some dinners with scientists over the last year or so, and came together with this guy I've known for a while, Blake Byers. He co-founded another really successful biotech and was an investor in biotech for a long time at Google Ventures. And he and I got more and more excited about the epigenetic reprogramming space as a really exciting area for longevity. You know, there's lots of areas people are looking at for longevity with different supplements and exercise and mental health and everything. And I think those are really important. But there's almost a moonshot to be looked at here, which is, can we actually change how genes are expressed in all of our cells to make them a little bit like, you know, they're young again? And so, of course, the DNA is the same in all of our cells, even though they differentiate over time into skin and muscle and neurons and whatnot. But with these transcription factors, we can, you know, Yamanaka got the Nobel Prize back in 2006, showing you could take a skin cell and kind of reprogram it back into a stem cell. So this has been, a lot of people over the last, you know, 4 or 5 years have sort of been thinking, well, what if we don't want to go all the way back to a stem cell, but we do want to go a little bit back in the cell of the life cycle of the cell? And I think there's a lot of interesting research to be done here. So this is not intended to be an institute that we're endowing that's purely academic, but it's a for-profit company. It's going to seek to create therapies that are more like intermediate targets along the way. You know, imagine, could we rejuvenate maybe your immune system, or you know, something in the eye, right? These are more still very difficult, but more achievable goals over maybe like a 5-year time frame or 3-year time frame. But the long-term goal would be to say, is there some kind of therapy we could all take that would rejuvenate tissue or organs throughout our entire body, and be at least a big piece of the puzzle toward longevity, or you know, curing aging would be like the kind of more ambitious way to put it, but we always have to be a little cautious. I think I love the idea of having really ambitious missions, but then you don't want to turn people off, because there's a lot of folks in the aging space that are sort of doing pseudoscience. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing with NewLimit. It's early days, and we're basically recruiting the founding team and more people for that team. And we've got some office space set up in Redwood City, California.
Awesome. Yeah, so I mean, I agree. The cellular reprogramming, I think, is really awesome. And just epigenetics itself, I mean, I've said previously on my channel, but it's one of the topics that actually kind of got me into biochemistry in the first place. I just think it's fascinating that what our cells are capable of. So in terms of the company itself, so it's primarily going to just be research to begin with. I'm trying to further do basic research before trying to find therapeutics from it.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, I think we're choosing some initial indications, and that are, again, these more like intermediate targets that we could go for. I think the initial thing we'll be doing is basically seeing if we can reproduce some of the existing science, and then scaling up the iteration speed of how quickly we can design an experiment, run it, collect the data, and have it inform the next experiment, right? I think one of the breakthroughs that, you know, one of the ways you get breakthroughs, I think, in this, and we're kind of doing it on an industrial scale, so it's hopefully not as constrained in just like one lab with purely manual efforts. But if we can increase the cycle time there, either by, you know, there's many ways you could increase the cycle time. You could choose a different animal model. You could use aged animals. You could do sort of multiplexing. You know, you could run multiple of these experiments in parallel, right? And there's a lot of bioinformatics, machine learning that we can use there to sort of design, you know, help design the next experiment and create this positive feedback loop, which hopefully iterates towards this. But I think if we're doing more, we'll be doing more basic science up front, but the goal would be eventually to get those intermediate targets into clinical trials, develop real therapies that that get to market and help real patients. So it's I do think there's a really healthy discipline in, shipping real products, and don't make it like some, multi-decade grail quest or something. We want to have real products along the way. And, an analogy I like to use is SpaceX, right? Like their ultimate mission is to make the human race interplanetary. But in the short term, they're like, all right, let's get the satellite into orbit, and maybe we can develop a revenue stream from that. That'll help fund the company to do the next step and the next step.
Cool. And so you mentioned things like machine learning. So like what kind of scientists are you trying to recruit? Like biologists, biochemists, data scientists, I guess the whole mix, right?
Yeah, so there's definitely a machine learning bioinformatics piece. There's experimentalists and scientists there. I think it's good to have really close collaboration between them. And then there's, we're hiring a head of R&D, like a VP of Ops or COO. So there's a couple, executive searches there. But that's some of the initial team. I suspect the team would be 25 people or so in the first year or so.
Cool. And so I guess more generally, like, is there anything else in the longevity space that you also think is like quite interesting at the moment?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of good companies out there in the longevity space. I mean, there's actually a number of other companies getting funded in the epigenetic reprogramming space, which is kind of, I feel like there's something happening there. It's like there's a lot of interesting, smart people moving in that direction. I could go through a whole bunch of other companies, but I'm not sure I have like a perfect list off the top of my head. Yeah.
Cool. So I guess to bring Patrick back into it again, just a more general question, as it's kind of this time of year, it's almost Christmas. I was just wondering if you have any just more general advice for people interested in this area, of any, maybe a particular book that you've either read or you're hoping to read over the holidays. Yeah.
So one of my favorite books is by a Dutch scientist called Dr. Dick Swab, and it's called We Are Our Brains. It was originally published in Dutch, so it's kind of like an awkward title in English, but it's like kind of like a manual to how your brain works, like from a neuroscience perspective, and then like cognitive psychology as well. So it's like amazing because like you'll read this book and it's like, oh wow, like it explains how anxiety works, right? It explains like how PTSD works, how like different drugs work. And yeah, I read it maybe the first time like 3 or 4 years ago, and it just provided so much insight to me about how like I actually think. And so, yeah, I would recommend everybody read it because it's been super beneficial for my own life.
Yeah, there was one really good science fiction book I read this year called Project Hail Mary. That I would recommend. That one was cool. And then I read a couple Siddhartha Mukherjee books, like about the Emperor of All Maladies, like about cancer, and I think he had another one on the gene. Yeah, the gene was cool.
Yeah, that's a good book. I recommend that one too.
Yeah.
Cool. I'll definitely be adding those to my reading list. And so also, I guess, kind of on from that, as it's almost the start of a new year, do you have any like advice? I guess, what can someone do to help improve their life next year, or like something related to academia?
Well, I mean, one thing I like to do every year is, I mean, this isn't specifically related to academia, but I just like to write down at the beginning of the year, what are my goals for the year? What would be a great year? If I try to think about my life a year from now, and usually I write down a number of business goals and some personal ones. And it could be anything from as simple as like, get a dog, to it could be like health related, or it could be, I want to have 100,000 people, using ResearchHub every day, right? Or so it could be something specific like that. So, and then what I like to do is, if you have a goal for the year, you kind of break it down into each quarter, and then ideally, every 2 weeks you have some kind of or every day, even usually when I wake up every day, I kind of write down, if I only got 3 things done today, like what would it be? And I sort of think about those long-term goals first, and then if there's what's the thing I'm doing today that'll help move it towards that. So I like to sort of connect all those things together. But I don't know, just like some good combination of health and relationships and fulfilling work seems to be a good combination. So if you do a little bit of that every day or every week, that seems like a good combo for me. I don't know. That's a big question, but Joyce, what do you think?
So like more in the academic realm, I think like taking the time to learn about open science. Like I have a lot of friends who are in PhD programs right now where it's kind of intimidating because people are so worried about like essentially just getting a job. You know, it's so competitive, like to take the extra time to potentially like put your career at risk by sharing things openly. Like it can be hard for an individual to do. Like I know a couple of people who aren't even really aware of like bioarchive and medRxiv and kind of the whole like culture around preprints just because like it doesn't make sense for them to spend time doing it. But just like one anecdote, which I think is really powerful. I had a friend who was a PhD student at University of Maryland who had like written a manuscript and thought it was really good, submitted to a bunch of journals, couldn't get published anywhere. And then they actually shared their paper on bioarchive and without even marketing it, like they didn't like share it to Twitter, like they didn't like put it on Reddit or anything like that. But just from being on bioarchive, they actually got other people to start sharing it because others thought it was interesting. And then eLife was like, oh, wow, this is a cool paper. Like they reached out to my friend and was like, can we please publish your paper? So like open science, like it can feel like a little bit of like a ethical type behavior, I guess. And a lot of people like to frame it that way, but it can also be used as like marketing for yourself. So like for early career researchers who want to put themselves out there more, taking the time to kind of like see what you can do in the open makes a huge difference. Even for ResearchHub, like we're building in the open. We have these weekly community calls like Brian mentioned that we publish to YouTube. We have a Slack channel that anyone can join, like help share feedback. And we've been able to meet a lot of really cool people by doing that. So I think the more you put yourself out there, the more you're gonna put up a bat signal for other like-minded like individuals to learn from you and network. So yeah, I think open science is a really cool thing that's worth taking the time to look into.
That's such a good point. Doing more work in the open, I think is something, science could really benefit from. It's like Joyce said, even I think I put out a blog post a few years back about how to improve science or something, and just thinking out loud. And Joyce and I think kind of connected. He found that I was even interested in that through the blog post, right? Or like, just your YouTube channel is a great example of this also, Eleanor. It's like you're probably learning some of this stuff, and it's like, all right, I'll just put it out there, but it's led to all these interesting connections, and somehow now we all got connected, right? And so I do think there's a little bit of this thing in science where everyone's like, oh, they're very precious about their work, and like, I don't want to look stupid, and so I'm going to be really sure it's buttoned up and it's proved and everything, it looks perfect, and it's almost like risk averse, right? And they're like, okay, I'm going to finally put out something, and it's been 2 years. But there's sort of a freedom that comes from doing work in the open. Like in open source software, people often like, they'll start a new project, literally like the very first project, and they'll commit in version control. You'd say, this is my first commit, and they'll push it live to the whole world. It's like everybody can see it. Like they literally just started the project 10 seconds ago, and the first commit is already live to the world. And they're doing work in the open because there's something nice about tearing off the Band-Aid. And then you get people who come in and see the project and that you might not have already connected with, and they'll give you ideas as you're evolving along the way. So I think once in a while, like Joyce was saying too, you'll put out, like, if you put out one thing every week, one of them will just be 100x, get 100x the attention of everything else you've ever done combined. And you can't really predict which one of those it's going to be. And so it's better just to be prolific sometimes and put it out there, and then it helps guide your work so you're not operating in this vacuum for years before you get any kind of feedback.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, you both just provided really incredibly useful advice there. And so also, I'm very grateful for you both coming on today and speaking to me. So obviously I'll be putting the link to ResearchHub in the description, but where else can people find information that you'd like them to go check out?
Yeah, well, particularly your audience. I mean, we'd love to have people join the Longevity Hub on ResearchHub. And, if there's an interesting paper that you've read, we'd love to have you submit it there. And if you have any papers that you've already see on the site, we'd love to have you jump in and add comments or discussion and in the open, so people can start to respond to it and think about it. And, if you're interested in becoming an editor of the Longevity Hub or another one, we have an application form. You can Google it, ResearchHub editor program. I think we'll pull it up. Yeah, but otherwise, I think you can follow us on Twitter at ResearchHub, right, Joyce? And we've got the Slack with the community calls that we host every week or two. So you can join the Slack to sort of give feedback about the product and the site as it's coming together. If you see bugs or anything like that. But yeah, Joyce, what else comes to mind?
We have an email address, hello@researchhub.com. That's easy to remember. I'm pat@researchhub.com. But yeah, I think the Twitter is probably the best place to send people at ResearchHub.
Yeah. Cool. I'll be certain to put those links in the description as well. So yeah, no, thank you both for coming on today. It's been just great to talk to you about ResearchHub. Like, I'm excited about the future of scientific research. I think it's good to always talk about the problems, but actually trying to address them is something way harder to do. And it's just great to see that we're starting to make some progress with that. So yeah, I'm really excited that you're both working on this.
We couldn't be happier with what you've been doing as well, Eleanor. I feel like it's awesome that like similar minds are meeting here across the world on the internet. So thank you for everything you're doing as well. It's super cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, the best part of this project is being able to meet people like you. I feel like it's every day I meet people who are so cool, doing cool stuff in the science space. So yeah, thank you again for taking the time to have us.
No problem. And yeah, no, thank you. And you just said the message that, yeah, it's great to connect. And also, yeah, hopefully anyone watching help connect as well and come join ResearchHub. So I hope you've learned something in this video. Thank you to my Patreon supporters and thank you for listening.